I'm glad that Karol has almost finished her aspiration, because I am getting tired of seeing her naked every time she does anything. Don't know what it is, but since it became spring, Karol seems to think that clothing is optional at the asylum. Last time at the asylum, Karol completed the third milestone of her aspiration, finally, and she had made a bit of headway with the next milestone because she had already maxed her gemology skill. Now all she had to do was cut a gemstone worth 2,500 simoleons and summon the Grim Reaper. And so the quickest and most efficient way to do this would be to get Karol in the right mood and get her to cut a jet gemstone of the highest quality, which she could then use to summon the Grim Reaper. And so with that in mind, Karol set to work. And once the gemstone was complete, it was put to charge, and that had checked off another part of the milestone, for the gemstone was worth more than 2,500 simoleons. Now all Karol had to do was wait for it to charge, and then summon the Grim Reaper. And so, with the gemstone fully charged, Karol set about to complete the final part of her aspiration, the one final action that would finally allow her to escape the asylum. Of course, Karol being Karol, she took her time about it. But finally, she completed it, and completed her aspiration. Karol had completed the Crystal Crafter aspiration, and that meant she could leave the asylum. Karol is the second inmate to leave the asylum, and once she is gone, that will leave just 6. And just to recap, here are all the steps that Karol had managed to successfully complete, which is really quite something given how just incredibly lazy she is. But finally the deed was done, and it was time for Karol to leave the asylum. But where would she go? There was only one place Karol could go when she left the asylum, and that was to live with her fellow former inmate, Ailish White. Being reunited after some time, surprisingly, Ailish was happy to see Karol. And it was surprising because although their relationship was quite good, it certainly had been very up and down. But for now they seemed happy. And with this, we end Karol's story. And as Karol's story ends, and we return to see just 6 Sims in our asylum, it's time to start someone else's story. And of our 6 remaining inmates, whose story will it be? It's Michelle's story! Oh, the Grim Reaper is still here because Karol summoned him and I didn't send him away. Well, let me just get on that, and then we'll get back to Michelle's story. Michelle's aspiration is Lady of the Knits, and the first step she's going to have to take for that is to knit for 5 hours, start 3 knitting projects whilst inspired, and knit in a rocking chair. And so, to start, she was going to have to start actually knitting. Unfortunately, without the rocking chair or any other really decent seating areas in the asylum, she would have to decide somewhere else to sit, and for some reason she chose to go and sit on Glen Green's bed. But a start was a start. And despite knitting spots being sparse in the asylum, and despite waking up feeling angry because of the general atmosphere in the asylum, Michelle had managed to complete knitting for 5 hours. And in order to help her with the next step of her aspiration, knitting in a rocking chair would need to be added to the asylum somewhere, because there's not really a lot of space in the asylum. And there we are, a nice rocking chair for Michelle to complete the next step of her aspiration. And just like that, Michelle had checked off another point of the first milestone of her aspiration. The next thing she would need to do is start 3 projects whilst inspired, but sitting next to the inspiring piano in the asylum would help her to achieve that. For some reason, Andy was speaking to himself immediately next to Michelle as she tried to complete her knitting, but that was the sort of thing that was to be expected in the asylum. Michelle didn't really particularly care for Andy because she didn't really see him as a threat. Michelle, unlike Andy, didn't really get paranoid and didn't really think that people were talking about her all the time, and she didn't really care, because she had found other ways to get along in life. One of those ways had involved completely stepping all over Glen Green, but as Glen generally stayed out of her way, that wasn't something she had to worry about too much. Instead, she could just rock away in her chair and knit, whilst everyone else around her does all the work in the asylum. Other than knitting and letting everyone else do all the work, there were other things that Michelle liked doing, like eating more often than was necessary and leaving dirty dishes lying around for others to clean up after her. As Michelle slept, Glenn took the opportunity to sit in the rocking chair to see what it actually felt like. The chair had once been his, but Michelle had taken it from him. Or rather, perhaps it would be kinder to say, Michelle was given it. It was taken out from under Glenn and given to Michelle. Michelle was making good progress with her aspiration, thanks to the piano that helped her to become inspired, allowing her to gain knitting skill faster and make better progress. Making fast progress through her aspiration due to unfair advantages that no one else around her had was something that was quite typical of Michelle. And conveniently, as she hears me talking about this, she becomes flirty, because becoming flirty is something else Michelle is good at in order to help her get along in life. But Michelle was shortly feeling inspired again, and so she started another knitting project. And in doing so, she checked off another part of her aspiration, and in fact completed the first milestone of her aspiration. And with that, we'll end Michelle's story here for today. Join us next time as we pick up again with Michelle as she embarks on the second milestone of her aspiration. Thanks for watching. Why is Susan very tense? Because she has a hangnail. You know, when I was picking the traits for these Sims, it was kind of just an approximation, but honestly, making Susan high maintenance was the most accurate of all of the Sims in this Asylum challenge.